What is up guys, it's Cal, and in this video I'll be doing an overview for balanced druids on the Battle for Azeroth beta. We'll be talking about their baseline abilities and passives, as well as their talents and PvP talents. Now there are quite a bit of changes here and there, I feel like maybe more buffs, but you can decide for yourself. So anyways, let's get started. So here are all the baseline abilities for the balanced druid. So for revive, that's their main res. It is unchanged at all. You can still res a target, and it reses them for 35% of their max health and mana, not castable in combat at least. And then rebirth, which obviously is castable in combat. The only change to it is it will have a cast time now. It's not instant cast, and it reses the target for 100% of their health. So they get resed for more health, because on live that is 60%. But they're still at 20% mana, and obviously it's castable in combat and usable in all shapeshift forms. Bark skin is unchanged, still a 1 minute cooldown. Your skin becomes tough as bark reduces all damage you take by 20% and prevents damage from delaying your spell cast, and it still lasts 12 seconds. You can still use it while stunned, frozen, incapacitated, feared, asleep, and in all shapeshift forms. Regrowth is unchanged. You still heal a target, and it's a hot for 12 seconds, and you can use it in Moonkin form. Remove Corruption is unchanged. 8-second cooldown, removes all curses and poisons from the target. Now Celestial Alignment has been changed somewhat, so it's still a 3-minute cooldown. It increases your damage by 15%, whereas on live that's 30%, and it will increase your haste by 15% now, because on live it increases like your astral power regen. No longer does that, and it now lasts 20 seconds, which is 5 seconds longer than on live. And then for Innervate, the only change to Innervate is it will last on the target for 12 seconds, up from 10 seconds. So you can still use it on friendly healer, and they can cast all spells for 12 seconds without spending any mana. Dash is unchanged. Actually, no, it is changed. My bad. It has a 2-minute cooldown, down from 3 minutes, and it increases your movement speed by 60%, which is down from 70%, and it lasts for 10 seconds, whereas on live it lasts for 15 seconds. So the cooldown was buffed to be a shorter cooldown, but you go just slightly slower, still pretty fast, I mean 60%, and it lasts 5 seconds less. Prowl is unchanged, still a 6-second cooldown. You can use it, activates cat form, and you become prowled. So for Sunfire, it's still a dot, does nature damage, and then does nature damage to all targets around it for 8 seconds. Still generates 3 astral power. The only change to it is it will damage targets that are 8 yards away from the main target. On live, that's a base of 5 yards, but your artifact weapon may go up to 10 yards. We won't have our artifact weapons anymore, so they're making it a static 8 yards, which is fine. Then we have Moonfire, which is unchanged, still arcane damage, dot. It's still usable in bear form, still generates 3 astral power. Then for Solar Wrath, this is still unchanged. It's still kind of like a filler move, deal nature damage, still generates 8 astral power. The only change to Lunar Strike is its spread. So it still is like a big nuke ability, 12 astral power it generates, and it deals arcane damage to the target, and it deals all arcane damage to all targets within 8 yards of it, which is 5 yards on live, I believe. And then for Star Surge, so it still costs 40 astral power. You launch a surge of stellar energies at the target, dealing some astral damage, and it also will grant you lunar and solar empowerment. Now the empowerments have been changed, and I'll actually talk more about them when I get to the passive, since the empowerments thing was just moved into a passive instead of being a part of the Star Surge tooltip. And the empowerments still increase the damage for your Solar Wrath and Lunar Strike, but it will also reduce their cast time by 15%, which is static. That 15% does not matter on your mastery, so just a strict 15%. And that used to be a talent called Starlord, which actually did 20%, but they just nerfed it kind of, and baked it right into the empowerments. So there is that. Once again, I'll show you that again once I get to the passive abilities. Then we have Starfall. So Starfall will now cost 50 astral power, which is down from 60, and it no longer applies stellar empowerment, which is not a thing anymore. Stellar empowerment is not a thing. So it still calls down a wave of falling stars at the targeted area, dealing some actual damage over 8 seconds. Then we have Solar Beam, which is unchanged, still a 1-minute cooldown. Call it on a location. It silences any enemies in that beam of light. Entangling Roots is also unchanged. Put on a target, they get rooted for 30 seconds, and the damage can cancel the effect. Now Soothe is coming back. Soothe was removed in Legion, and it does the same thing as before, 10-second cooldown, and it dispels all enrages off of the target. So that's awesome. And then also, what else is returning? Well, Hibernate, which this was removed in Warlords of Draenor, I believe, and you can put a target to sleep for up to 40 seconds. And you can only do it to one target, and it only works on Beasts and Dragonkin. So that's awesome that that's returning. Teleport Dreamwalk is staying to my knowledge. It just says Teleport Moonglade here because I made a new character to show these abilities off, but when I ported my actual level 110 Druid from live to the beta, he had Teleport Dreamwalk. So I believe you'll still have Teleport Dreamwalk. Now let's take a look at the passive abilities. So obviously, you still have your Shapeshift forms. They have not changed at all. Astral Influence is still staying the same. Increases the range of all your abilities by 5 yards. Eclipse is returning. So this was removed in Legion, and its effect has, well, changed. So Lunar Strike has a 20% chance to grant you Solar Empowerment, and Solar Wrath has a 20% chance to grant you Lunar Empowerment. So that's nice there. And then here's the Empowerments passive that I was talking about. So for Lunar Empowerment, it increases the damage of your next Lunar Strike by 43% and reduces its cast time by 15%. As I mentioned earlier, that 15% is static. It does not depend on your mastery. The 43% obviously does depend on your mastery. And then for Solar Empowerment, causes your next Solar Wrath to explode for an additional 21% of its damage to all nearby enemies, and reduces its cast time by 15%. And you still can accumulate up to 3 of each empowerment, which is nice. And then Light Form is still there. Your mastery is changed, sort of. So it will now increase the damage of your Moonfire and Sunfire, which I don't believe it does on live. Still increases damage of Starfall by some percentage based on your mastery. It will increase the damage of your Star Surge based on some percentage of your mastery, and which is the same on live. And it increases the damage of Lunar Empowerments by an additional that percentage, and Solar Empowerments by about half of that percentage. Now let's take a look at the talents. So before I get to the talents, there is one thing I actually just noticed. Moonkin Form has, I believe, been nerfed somewhat. So it shapeshifts into Moonkin Form, increases the damage of all your spells by 10%, which is the same on live, but it will increase your armor by 125%, whereas on live that's 300%. So there's also that. Now for the talents, Nature Balance was moved all the way up to the first tier, and it's been changed. So it was on the last tier, not on the first tier. So while in combat, you generate 2 astral power every 3 seconds, and then while out of combat, your astral power rebalances to 50 instead of depleting to empty. I actually really like this change. I like it better than what Nature's Balance was before, to be honest. Then there's Warrior of Elune, which did get a buff. So still 45-second cooldown, your next 3 lunar strikes are instant. That part is the same on live, and you generate 40% additional astral power. That second part is new. And then Force of Nature did also get a buff. So it's still a 1-minute cooldown. You summon 3 treants for 10 seconds that will immediately taunt and attack enemies in the targeted area. That's the same on live, but it will now generate 20 astral power. So that's nice. And then for the second tier, so Displacer Beast, they did remove Displacer Beast, and it's kind of been replaced by Tiger Dash, which kind of does the same thing, but not quite. So Tiger Dash replaces Dash, 45-second cooldown, it will activate Cat Form, and it'll increase your movement speed by 200%, which reduces gradually over 5 seconds. So I actually tried this a bit on the beta, and I really like it, though I also really like Displacer Beast. Then there's Renewal, which is unchanged and not changed at all. So 1/2 minute cooldown instantly heals you for 30% of your max health, and you can use it in any shapeshift form. And then Wild Charge is also unchanged, still a 15-second cooldown. If you use it while not shapeshifted, fly to an ally's execution, use it in bear form, charge to an ally, or charge to an enemy, immobilizing them for 4 seconds. Using it in cat form, leaps behind an enemy, which dazes them for 3 seconds. Using it in moonkin form, balance backwards. Using it in travel form, it leaps you forward 20 yards, and then using it in aquatic form, increases your swim speed by an additional 150% for 5 seconds. Now this third tier. So all these should look familiar: Feral Affinity, Guard Affinity, Restoration Affinity, but just their effects have, I guess, slightly been changed. So for Feral Affinity, still increases your movement speed by 15%. You will learn Rake, Rip, and Swipe, and your energy regeneration is still increased by 35%, I mean. So you no longer learn Ferocious Bite from this, and Shred is actually baseline for cats. So if I go into cat form here now, you'll see Shred there. So Shred is right there. It does award 0 combat points, oddly enough. I guess without Feral Affinity, there's nothing to spend your combo points on. So for Guardian Affinity, it still reduces all damage you take by 6%. You learn Thrash, Iron Fur, and Frenzied Regeneration. The only thing that's not there that is there on live is Mangle, which is baseline. So if we go into bear form, you'll see Mangle there. If you don't pick it, the only things you can do are Mangle and Growl. And then we have Restoration Affinity. So it still grants you Ysera's Gift, heals you for 3% of your max health every 5 seconds. If you're at full health, it'll heal an injured party or raid member. Now that's the same on live. It grants you Rejuvenation, Swift Mend, and Wild Growth. So on live, it granted you a Healing Touch. Healing Touch is actually getting removed, which is kind of strange because it's been a thing since vanilla. But yeah, it's removed from even Resto. So you get Wild Growth instead. Now for the level 60 tier, this tier has actually not been changed at all. So Mighty Bash, still a 50-second cooldown. Use it on target, stuns them for 5 seconds, and you can use it in all shapeshift forms. Mass Entanglement, unchanged, 30-second cooldown. You root everyone in a 15-yard radius for 30 seconds. Usable in all shapeshift forms. And a Typhoon, knockback, 20 yards, 30-second cooldown, and it also dazes the targets that you knock back for 6 seconds, and it's usable in all shapeshift forms. Then the level 75 tier. So for Soul of the Forest, it will increase the damage bonuses from your lunar and solar empowerments by 30%. On live, that's 20%, so it's buffed in that respect, and it reduces Starfall by 10 astral power, reduces the cost of it, whereas on live that's 20 astral power. And then Star-Lord, we mentioned this before, but it wasn't completely removed. It's moved all the way down to the level 75 tier, and its effect has been changed because remember the original Star-Lord effect was just baked into Star Surge. But what it does now is Star Surge and Starfall grant you 3% haste for 20 seconds, and it stacks up to 3 times, so gaining a stack does not refresh the duration. And then for Incarnation, still has a 3-minute cooldown. It's an improved Moonkin form that increases the damage of all of your spells by 25%, so on live this is 35%, but remember Celestial Alignment was 30%. Remember, this replaces Celestial Alignment. And it still grants you 15% haste, which is what Celestial Alignment will do in BFA. So Incarnation will actually buff Celestial Alignment by 10% from what it does without it, whereas Alive it buffs it from 5%. But the damage is, I mean, still overall less than what Incarnation does on live. And it still lasts for 30 seconds. You may shapeshift in and out of Improved Moonkin form for its duration. So hopefully what I just said makes sense. But anyways, there's Stellar Drift. So Stellar Drift was just moved up a tier, and it was nerfed. So it increases Starfall's radius by 20% on live, that's 30%, and its damage by 25%, whereas on live that's 50%. And it allows you to cast while moving within Starfall's area. So a pretty big nerf there, I feel like. Twin Moons is new, so it's a passive. Moonfire deals 20% increased damage and also hits another nearby enemy within 15 yards of the target. And then there's Stellar Flame. So Stellar Flame was just moved down a tier. It no longer costs astral power, and it will now generate 8 astral power. It will still burn down targets for some astral damage, and then additional damage over 24 seconds, you know, it's a dot, but it will now generate 8 astral power. And then for the final tier, the only change to Shooting Star is it will generate 2 astral power, which is down from 4 on live. So Moonfire and Sunfire damage over time effect has a chance to call down a falling star, dealing some astral damage, which that part's the same on live. But just the generation of astral power is different. Then there's Fury of Elune, which has been changed. So it no longer costs astral power, it will now generate it. It's still a 1-minute cooldown, calls down a beam of pure celestial energy that follows the target, dealing some astral damage over 8 seconds to all nearby targets, but it'll now generate 40 astral power over its duration. And then we have New Moon, which this should look familiar to all balanced druids because this was the ability that your artifact weapon granted you. Well, it's returning in the form of a talent, and it's pretty much unchanged. So you cast New Moon, and it will turn into Half Moon, cast Half Moon, and that also turns into Full Moon, and it still generates the same astral power each moon. So New Moon generates the same, half moon generates the same, full moon generates the same. The only change to it is it has a 25-second recharge, whereas on live, it's a 15-second recharge. So I'm excited about that because I do like new moon. But those are all talents. Now let's talk about the PvP talents. So if you didn't watch my video going over how PvP talents work, this is how it goes. You have these 4 bubbles here. This first bubble is the same for all classes and all specs. You get to pick between Gladiator's Medallion, Relentless, and Adaptation. They're all in the first tier on live, and they all do the exact same thing. You get to pick between one of those. These next 3 are a giant pool of your already existing PvP talents. So you get to pick between 3 of all of these. So as you can tell, it's no longer on a tier system. It's now on a giant pool system that you can pick from. As far as the changes to them, most of them have not been changed. There have been, I think, like 4 changes to them total. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mouse over all of them, and then I'm just gonna say the names of them. If you want to know what they do, you can pause the video to read them or look at your balance druid. But for the 4 changes to the PvP talents, I will be talking about those changes. So anyways, there's Celestial Guardian, Crescent Burn, Celestial Downpour, Moon and Stars. So this used to be called Eclipse. Now it's been renamed to Moon of Stars because Eclipse is a passive for balanced druids now. And the only change to it is it will not reduce the cooldown of Celestial Alignment by 1 minute. So Celestial Alignment still does summon a beam of light at your location, granting you 70% reduction to silences and interrupts for 10 seconds. So that's the same, but just no longer reduces the cooldown of Celestial Alignment by 1 minute. Then there's Moonkin Aura. The only change to Moonkin Aura is, well, whenever you Star Surge, all allies within 40 yards have their spells critical strike chance increased by 15%, which that's the same on live, but it's for 8 seconds, whereas that's 12 seconds on live. So, a little bit of a nerf there. Then there's Dying Stars, Deep Roots, which has been changed, so damage will break Entangling Roots, but now it takes 200% of normal damage to break Entangling Roots. Then Fairy Swarm, Cyclone, Iron Feather Armor, Prickling Thorns, Protection of the Grove, and then Thorns, which Thorns used to just be a resto PvP talent. Now Balance is getting it. So it's a 45-second cooldown. You sprout Thorns for 12 seconds on the friendly target. When victim to melee attacks, Thorns deal up to 5% of the attacker's total health in nature damage. And then attackers also have their movement speed reduced by 50% for 4 seconds. So that's really nice. So those are all of the PvP talents, as well as all of the normal talents. And there you have it, all the changes to balanced druids coming in Battle for Azeroth. Now these changes will be going into effect around mid-July, which is when the pre-patch will come out, but I'm curious to know what you guys think. I don't main a druid, but my druid is one of my main alts. I do like the changes for the most part, but if you didn't, or even if you hated them, you can leave in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed this video, you can leave a like on it, you can sub to the channel for more videos like this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.